You're listening to Jason Lee Willis's reading of The Wintermaker. Chapter 27, The Sacred Flame, Mesquite Band of Ojibwe Reservation, September 6th, 1961. Leonard White Elk extended the empty dream catcher to McGeesee, who hesitated for a moment before taking it. "So Fawn is dead?" McGeesee asked from the doorway of his cabin. Leonard looked at Ben Labiche before answering. "Her spirit lingered for a while, long enough for us to speak one last time. My brothers and their families then joined us to help guide her on the River of Souls. They gave her a proper Anishinaabe funeral." "And where is she buried?" "Far away from here, which was her wish. If there is a place beyond the grasp of the horned serpent, it is the place where I buried her." "Sit, both of you," McGeesee said to Leonard and Ben Labiche, stepping out onto the porch. He looked down at the dream catcher for several moments, but like an empty bowl, it held nothing for the old man. "Your mother saved my life," McGeesee said, gesturing off to the distance and the shimmer of Lake Manitou. "If not for her, I'd be another trapped soul. My young body would have withered and died, and that would have been my story. Certainly, she told you her dream of the turtle." Leonard again looked over to his nephew. "Are you listening? You need to remember everything you hear during our visit." The chubby boy nodded sincerely. During the battle with the Wintermaker, Fawn had a vision sent by Manabozho. In this vision, she saw the hero from legend, Ayash, but her assumption was that it was you, trapped on the island by the horned serpent. Indeed, when she gathered the others together, like in the first Medawiwin Lodge, Lily found a way to restore this sick boy back to health, just like in the tale. But that wasn't the only thing she saw in her vision from Manabozho, was it? "No," Leonard answered. Fawn realized she'd misinterpreted the vision to be about you. It was a vision about the seventh stopping place, and that in order to save the real Ayash, she needed to fulfill prophecy. Leonard turned to Benjamin. "The Anishinaabe people left the Atlantic coast to fulfill the prophecy. They stopped in Montreal, Niagara Falls, Detroit, Manitoulin Island, Sault Ste. Marie, and Madeline Island. But the seventh stopping place remained elusive. Some felt it was Spirit Island by Duluth. Others thought that it might be Mille Lacs, and there were some who felt it was here at Lake Manitou. My sister and I found the sacred Migi shells just a short walk from where we sit today," McGeesee added. "Your grandmother's vision showed her a turtle, a symbol that represents the seven fires prophecy, the story of creation, the story of the great flood, and for a brief while it represented Lake Manitou. But Fawn revisited her vision again and again, realizing her mistake. She knew the turtle represented the vast continent of North America and the journey of the seven fires. While Ayash was found on the edge of the turtle, the seventh stopping place was not here in Minnesota, but high upon the ridge of the turtle's back. And this is why your grandmother left her home." "And did she find the seventh stopping place?" McGeesee asked. "For you to learn the answer, you'd have to leave Lake Manitou and come back with me," Leonard explained. "Me? Leave here? No, I've summoned you. We are all in danger. All of humanity is in danger." Fawn read your letters and instead chose to stay. She believed this new threat was a trick devised by your sister. "A trick? I have seen the Tokpai prowling the dark shores. Evil has woken. I have kept my vigil for decades, and something is happening." "I do not doubt that something is happening, but my mother told me not to trust anything that happens here as long as Lily Guerin lives. And she lives, doesn't she? Her battle with death is over, but she has a long road to recovery. Her flesh might be weak, but her spirit is strong. Fawn told me what Lily did in her battle with the Wintermaker. I've brought my nephew Benjamin to be trained, but at the end of the week, we'll be leaving and returning home. A week? I can't possibly pass what I know in a week. Fawn understood, perhaps better than you or your sister, the power of prophecy. Her vision of the bear, marten, crane, loon, fish, eagle, raven, and deer will certainly come to pass, which is why my nephew and I have come. I will learn the role of the Wawasheshi, and Leonard will learn the way of the eagle directly from you. But just a week. A battle is coming. You can't leave. I am not an ignorant man, but the autumnal equinox is coming at the same time as a full moon, and with Lily still taking breath, there is no way on earth I would let Benjamin stay here. I don't doubt the Tokpai are prowling, which is why you will only get a week. McGeesy's face seemed to compress in angry wrinkles. Your mother and I were allies. We are not the only ones who spoke with the Wintermaker. For the better part of 10 years, we prepared to fight the Wintermaker when the Serpent Star returned. First, Lily was betrayed, and then we were betrayed by Lily. Remember that before you pass judgment. I want to trust you, but for my mother's sake. If I did stay, what do you think would happen? Something has stirred in the darkness, and for reasons I do not understand. The last time, my sister accidentally woke the Tokpai and the Wintermaker, and we must make sure it does not happen again. Accidentally? While I share your blood, I know what Lily is. She is Ouijigan. Her fate was to bring death, which she has brought again and again. The Creator shaped her for that role. Her actions were inevitable, not accidental. No, Father Guerin spoke of delaying the prophecy. He said our role in the Asanti Lodge was to stand against the darkness. That is what I do. I must stay and guard against the darkness. Admirable, but misguided. The unstoppable force meets the immovable object. You do know that this prophecy is a tapestry of beliefs. The Anishinaabe are not the only ones who know of it. For generations, the Ocheti Sakowin, my father's Sioux, stood as guardians while the Anishinaabe, my mother's Chippewa, searched for the end of the prophecy. Both were instruments of the great Creator. Who are you to impose your will? McGeesy chuckled. You sound like my grandfather. You have the spirit of an old man, and I still feel like a boy. I am your ally, even in disagreement. So you would do nothing? McGeesy asked. I am here, aren't I? Fawn explained several things to me. Fawn had a stroke giving birth to you. She was incapable of speech. Leonard looked long into McGeesy's eyes, and then down at the Dreamcatcher. Fawn told me that the water drum is very real, and while Lily used it to defeat the Wintermaker, it is still too powerful to trust. Yet, you stay here? Why? You are the 6th generation to claim it as what? An heirloom? You see yourself as a guardian? What could you do to stop me if I wanted to take it? Is that why you are here? A murderous Sioux? Is that it? Leonard ignored McGeesy's agitation. The water drum is key to unlocking the prophecy, and whether in your possession or in the possession of a Frenchman, it will still serve its purpose when the Creator determines. What about the Ironwood Scrolls? What about them? Fawn told me they contain ancient magic. a song written upon them. So, do you have birch bark scrolls hidden in a nearby cave? Or do you have copies of copies? McGeesy grew sullen. What is your point? We are in the era of the sixth fire. Isn't it plain? It began with the arrival of Halley's Comet in 1910, and it will end with its return in 1986. You act as if a great battle is about to begin any day, when it most likely won't happen until, what, 2061? You and I will be dust by then, even if we held the water drum in one hand and the ironwood scrolls in another, and stood upon the right spot at the right time. You're still missing something. The sacred fire? Did Fawn find it? We need to pass our knowledge to the next generation, McGeesy, and pray that your sister's betrayal does not doom all of mankind. We must trust in the future, that the boy in the snakeskin boots and the scarred woman, that they will find a way to defeat evil. You underestimate our enemies, McGeesy stated. Father Garin knew all about them, and they seek to control the prophecy, which tells of a glorious eighth eternal fire, but it also tells of fire and destruction. Your faith is foolish. You said that it was Lily's destiny to wake the Wintermaker, but if Father Garin and the others had not fought, Joseph Littletoad would have given the Wintermaker his victory over death. Humanity walked upon the razor's edge that night. A paradox of fate and free will. I trust fate, and McGeesy believes in shaping his own destiny. I understand. But you will not stay? Leonard shook his head. Train us. Hell, come back with us, McGeesy, where it is safe. No, I've felt the touch of the Wintermaker, and I'll do what I can to fight against him and his servants. After a moment, McGeesy handed the Dreamcatcher back to Leonard. And I'll pick up the pieces when this is over. Someone must trust the ancient prophecies. Chapter 28. A Road Less Traveled. Split Rock, Minnesota, September 24th, 1961. The full moon peeked in through the bedroom window of Chris Looning as he learned about the dead boy. His pillow was damp from crying, and he'd prayed himself to sleep after hearing the awful news. Isaac Larson had been found dead shortly before noon along the cliffs of Bleeding Rock. No foul play, an accident, a misstep on a shortcut home. The TV news flashed up a picture, and in that moment, Chris knew he'd most likely been the last person to speak to the boy. Split Rock High School homecoming was held Friday, September 22nd, and after a raucous pep fest, the high school kids streamed out of the gym to get ready for the parade, and the junior high boys flooded out the door for an extra 15 minutes of football before the buses arrived. Isaac Larson had been with them, unaware that they lingered because most were staying for the game later that evening. Dang, I missed my bus, Isaac said to Chris, who'd just fumbled the ball, leading to a pileup of bodies a few yards away. That sucks, Chris said, and turned back to the pile. It was the last time anyone saw Isaac alive. In life, he turned his back, but now, in his dream, he watched the fourth grader continue toward home. Isaac grabbed his book bag from the line of bags that formed the out-of-bounds sideline, let out a whimper, and bolted another 10 yards before surrendering to his situation. A handful of aides still stood in front of the school, helping the younger kids onto the buses, but Isaac didn't approach any of them. It was a beautiful September day, with clear blue skies, warm temperatures, and no wind. He stood for a moment, weighing his options. He turned and began walking. Bus 8 headed east out of town for 2 miles before turning south. It made a dozen stops before it ended up on Old Copper Road, where Isaac lived next to the entrance of Carousel Park. As Isaac walked down the hill to the stoplight at the corner of highways 34 and 19, he looked around at all the people and cars passing him by. Instead of continuing along busy Market Street, he waited for the stoplight to turn green so he could cross Highway 19. Once across the intersection, the routine became clear to Chris. Isaac Larson intended to follow the railroad south until it crossed the Division Street Bridge, where he could walk through the pine woods of the big granite bluff between the river and the lake, which ended at Old Copper Road. With Fisher's Sawmill on one end and Fisher Lumber Mill on the other, and from his numerous visits to Biff's house, Chris knew the territory well. Now Chris watched helplessly as Isaac chose a road less traveled. North Division Street was a major road in town, but past Highway 19 and the railroad, it turned into a gravel road that skirted the northern edge of the bluff and descended to the lake and the boat ramp. Isaac looked toward the dock, but he turned to the highway bluff down the hill. The bluff halfway down the hill. The pine forest was wild and free. The granite outcroppings was actually difficult to climb, and he had to ascend it on all fours as he scaled 30 yards of elevation in a distance of only 20 yards. Once he reached the top, the view was grand. The dome of the bluff was covered in old pine trees towering above his head. Unlike the pines in his grove, these trees had few lower branches, which allowed him to see the patches of exposed rock emerging from the rusty blanket of dead pine needles. To his right, all 7 miles of Lake Manitou stretched out before him, drawing him closer for a peek over the edge. "No, you fool, don't do it," Chris called out. Below Isaac's feet, the granite sloped away to the water's edge. But a few hundred yards ahead, the incline became a sheer cliff. Isaac had no problem keeping proper pace as he made a beeline for the highest point of the bluff. When he reached the cliff, he paused, dropped to his belly, and cautiously crawled forward until his chin stuck over the drop-off. The granite was solid, allowing him to place both hands on the sharp edge as he looked to the rocks below. The summer had been dry. Most years, fishermen cast jigs where the water met the perpendicular stone, but now a pile of rubble and rocks angled down to the water's edge. Drawing saliva and mucus from his nose and throat, Isaac hawked a big loogie, listening as it splatted on one of the stones below. What is he doing? Chris wondered from his bed. Standing back up, Isaac unzipped his jeans and peed over the cliff. Even though he stood 2 paces from the edge, he could hear the urine creating a mini waterfall. Once done, he zipped up and hustled on his way. Isaac crossed a bald area of exposed granite so uniform he could walk over it like a paved parking lot. Even though it undulated in areas, it was almost level, except for an area where stones were stacked up in man-made columns. There were a few beer cans and bottles to indicate bored teens had come out drinking. There were about a dozen piles of stones, each consisting of a dozen flat stones that had been carried onto the top of the bluff. Some were toppled in piles, begging to be stacked again. As Isaac passed by one of them, he kicked it over, toppling the pile, but also causing the top stones to come crashing into his ankle. Isaac winced when he found a bloody scrape. His mood spoiled, he continued, limping slightly. As he descended the bluff, the forest changed. The northern slope of the bluff had only pines, but downhill, thick bushes grew between the pines along the southern slope, and the shadows thickened. From these bushes, Isaac heard a whisper that stopped him cold in his tracks. Chris Looning heard it too, an echo from the previous day. Isaac turned in all directions. Nothing but trees and dark bushes surrounded him. He took a few steps forward. Another whisper. "Who's there?" he called out defensively. He could see 100 yards all around, yet nothing explained where the source of the sound had come from. "Run, you fool. Get out of there," Chris cried. Isaac's legs wobbled. The only threat seemed to be in the obvious uncertainty of the shadows. Indecision caused him to simply sit where he'd stopped. He whimpered with fear. His body shook uncontrollably as he stared at the growing shadows in the bushes. Then one of them moved. "Help!" Isaac whispered. "Follow us," the shadow from the bushes said. "We will help you find your way home." Isaac's eyes grew wide. Chris also could see several shadows separate from the bushes to stand in front of him. Even though there were few features, Chris somehow knew they were female. "Do not stay in this unholy place. Evil spirits haunt these woods," another shadow said. "Come with us before it is too late." Too late. Isaac looked to his right, and in the western sky, stealing both light and warmth, a cloud bank swallowed the bright September sun. The shadows grew. "Now, little one," the shadowy faces of a dozen women called out together, "we will show you the way." Isaac stood up. With his eyes fixed on the shadows, he began to shake his head. His legs turned, whisking him from the danger of the strange women who hid in the bushes at the bottom of the hill. "Run back to the sawmill. Men will be there," Chris instructed, and for a moment it felt as if he was going to save the boy from the nightmare. But as Isaac passed by the stacked stones, one of the shadows kicked out a leg to trip him, and Isaac slammed into the granite floor so hard that his front teeth shattered. Wailing started from the shadowy white women behind him. His hand inspected the damage and dabbed at the blood, but when he looked up, another of the stone stacks began to change shape. A small troll stepped right out of a fairy tale and into the reality of Hiawatha County. It was gray as granite, with long arms and short little legs. Instead of hair, it seemed to have quills like a porcupine. The creature stood straight up. Long fingers began to twitch and reach. Another black troll approached, blocking the sawmill. In the distance, the wail of the women grew louder. Now he only had two paths, two choices. Isaac chose to run toward the river. Just like his entrance to the bluff, the granite dropped away in massive steps that descended sharply to the river below. He ducked around a few trees before another porcupine man jumped out behind a tree and slammed his gray hands into his chest. Isaac tumbled so hard his backpack went flying off his shoulders. A fourth face emerged from the needles, gathered in a pocket of granite. The little troll climbed out of solid earth, and soon long fingers were grasping at his leg. Isaac crab-crawled backwards for a moment, seeing all four creatures closing in on him. He turned his back on them for a moment so he could rise again to run, but with the lake looming in front of him, the creatures corralled him like a lamb to a place where he'd peed off the edge just a short time earlier. With a shove, Isaac was knocked off his feet. Then the creatures attacked. His body rolled and rolled. Then Isaac Larson fell to the place where a fisherman had found him on Saturday. Chris Looning felt as if he'd been murdered also. Once his sobbing stopped, he threw his blanket from his head and walked to his window, where he could see the slope of bleeding rock across the river. They can't get away with this. Somehow, I need to stop them. Chapter 29, Lost in the Woods. Brainerd, Minnesota, September 30th, 1961. Patches of willowy hair grew between the long strands of gray that remained unharmed by the flames. Despite her clothing catching fire, only a few discolored patches gave indication Grandma Lily had been in a house fire. "Why's that mask tied to her face?" Nikki Guerin asked when the busy nurse returned to the room. "I thought she was better." "It helps her breathe. Because of all the damage the fire caused, her lungs haven't healed yet, and she's developed a bad case of pneumonia. Even though she struggles to breathe, the mask makes sure every breath she takes is full of rich oxygen. That helps her recovery." "Can she take it off?" The nurse hesitated. "For a while. All the talking she did last week gave her this cough. So we're just taking precautions. At her age, recovery will take a lot longer. With that, the nurse left the room again, leaving the three of them to share the silence. Nikki sat in a straight wooden chair beside the bed, where she caressed the top of her grandmother's hand above the spot where the IV needles had been inserted into her veins. Is she sleeping or too weak to open her eyes? In the corner near the closet, Gavin McPherson sat clad in his heavy denim jacket, clutching the newspaper. He locked eyes with Nikki across the bed as if prompting her to say or do something, but then his head drooped as he solemnly stared at his feet. Nikki listened to the ventilator pumping air through the tubes and into the mask and watched the blanket slowly rise with each breath her grandmother took. On her lap, Nikki had a folded sheet of messages from her family that she decided to read. Cameron's message had brought her to tears, prompting Gavin to get up from the chair. She affectionately gave his hand a squeeze as he stood beside her. As soon as she let go, he went back to his chair. Nikki folded up the sheet and slid it into the purse beside her feet. She paused when she saw the leather-bound journal inside. The homecoming dance was last weekend, Nokomis, Nikki said softly, but her voice felt like a shout in the sterility of the hospital room. I've made lots of new friends at school. I'm getting all A's, despite working in the delivery room at the creamery. Dad has a new job at the lumber mill where he works on the motors. It's just a few hours a day, but I think it helps that he's out of the house. Even though Carousel Park is closed, they still pay Cameron to visit each day to make sure everything there is secure. Her mother's hand rose from the side of the bed to pull away the mask. You must protect him. Nikki felt her heart quake in her chest. Cameron? What's happening, Nokomis? I'm sorry. This is all my fault. Nikki quickly reached into her purse and found the silver tip of the melted lighter. Did someone start the fire? Does someone want to hurt us, Nokomis? Her grandmother took a breath to answer, but a thick cough stole her words. She tried to keep it down, but the coughing fit became more violent, causing Gavin to sit forward as if he were going to bolt down to the nurse's station. After some fumbling, the mask was back over her mouth, and after a few shallow breaths, the coughing fit stopped. Tears ran through the deep creases in the corner of her eyes to drop onto the pillow. Her grandmother nodded slightly and then closed her eyes again. Nikki's hand clenched the piece of metal for a few moments before she put it back in her purse. She picked it up and stood. What did she say? Gavin asked. Let's get out of here, Nikki said, ignoring the question. Out in the truck, Gavin forced the answer by keeping the keys in his hands instead of putting them in the ignition. What did she say? She apologized, that's all. Gavin calmly set the newspaper down between them and waited. Nikki glanced at it, seeing the picture of the little boy who'd recently drowned on his way home from school. She said, I need to protect him, okay? And I don't know what to do. What should I do? Gavin slipped the keys in the ignition, but then leaned back into his seat. As always, his face hid the emotions from her, and his thoughts were his own, so she waited for him to make his point. We need to tell someone about the lighter. I just feel that the fire, the roller coaster accident, and now the Larson boy, it's too much to ignore. It's so easy for him to be the hero, isn't it? It's been more than 3 months since the fire, and everyone has decided the fire was an accident. Like they decided Isaac Larson died accidentally. No one's going to believe us. We have the journal. It's not proof of anything. Your grandmother almost died trying to retrieve it. We both looked at it. You can't deny it is important. He doesn't get it. I didn't say that it wasn't important. I said it wasn't proof. What are we going to say if we give it to somebody? The Manitou did it? We'd look like idiots. Gavin's lips tightened. We could tell them about the Red Thunderbird and those men that stopped by their house. Nikki sighed. If your brother is in danger, you're in danger. We need to tell someone. especially if those men are out there killing kids. Isaac Larson fell to his death, she sarcastically repeated the official account back to him. No one killed him. What about the tooth? What? They didn't put it in the newspapers, but my dad was one of the men who found his body near Bleeding Rock. Isaac's front teeth were broken. Well, of course they were broken. He fell off a cliff. Gavin shook his head. They found his backpack before they found his body, and a few yards from where they found it, they found blood and a piece of tooth. It was like Isaac fell while running from something. The men in the Thunderbird? Possibly, either that or what? What did your Grandpa Gene call the porcupine monsters in his notebook? Tokpai. Tokpai, Gavin repeated flatly. You suddenly believe in porcupine men. Are you telling me that the porcupine men stopped at a gas station to fill up their gas can, and while there picked up a lighter? Your grandfather's journal said there would most likely be 12 deaths, Nikki interrupted. Yes, I've read it also, but I am not ready to believe that Tokpai loosened the bolts on the roller coaster. Everybody knows your father hadn't worked at the park for weeks, Nikki. It wasn't his fault. It just happened. Of course it wasn't his fault. I think someone sabotaged the roller coaster knowing he wasn't there to check it. You can't arrest something supernatural. Someone started the fire. Someone loosened the bolts, and if I were to guess, someone pushed poor Isaac Larson off the cliff. Right. Which is why we must say something to somebody. Nikki reached down and picked up the journal from her purse. How much of it did you read before you gave it back to me? I read the whole thing. Your grandmother said we need to protect Cameron. It's because of the prophecy, isn't it? Yeah, but you're getting a C+ in English because you flipped through the stories instead of actually reading all the words. He sighed. In the stories, Ayash is always described as a young boy. And in the seventh fire, it again describes a young boy with a strange light in his eyes. This is why my grandfather thought the zealots abducted Magisi, because he was a boy. Cameron is 21 years old, which makes it unlikely he is the reincarnation of Ayash, or the boy with the strange blue eyes, or even the Omadai, whatever that was supposed to mean. Then why did your grandmother say we need to protect him? Nikki held her tongue to avoid saying something cruel. Are we going to spend the whole day talking about this? We're supposed to be shopping, aren't we? I shouldn't have asked you to swing by the hospital. There was a reason my mother insisted my grandmother live in the guest house, okay? Crazy people can look at something and see answers that simply are not there. What about the lighter and the gas can? Do you have some rational answers for them? Gavin pressed. Nikki spoke sternly but softly. We both believe it was not an accident. And without the paranormal or conspiracy theories, it leaves us with the simple fact that Lily Guerin is an Indian living off the reservation. What? Is he honestly this naive? You don't see the way everyone looks at me at school. Some of those girls hate my guts, Gavin. Do you know why? You're the new girl? No, I'm Injun. I'm a Tij. I might cut my hair short and wear nice clothes, but they see an Indian. Nothing I can do will change that, and for all I know, some drunk from the Crowbar wandered off the road and with hatred in his heart and tried to finish off what his white ancestors failed to do. You don't believe that. Gavin finally turned the keys, firing up the truck engines. So, where do you want to go? Nikki stared down at the journal. There was a piece of paper inside it with the address of several shops in Brainerd, but she couldn't bring herself to take her hands off the leather binding. Tears formed in her eyes, and she found herself biting her bottom lip. Nikki, why do you care about any of this? Lake Manitou's my home too, and since the fire, 5 people have died. It was a safe answer, but it was enough. If we can't go to the authorities, then I need you to bring me to the reservation so I can give this to someone who can figure it out. So, no shopping? Nikki shook her head. Where are we going? We're going to go find my great uncle McGeesy. Chapter 30, Busting Heads, Split Rock High School, October 3rd, 1961. Biff Forsberg loved busting heads, especially on defense. He didn't have time to think about football, for it allowed him to hurt with impunity, which he did on each play. He held out a hand and helped the Pine River running back off his feet, savoring the second groan as the kid rose unsteadily. Biff looked to the sideline where Coach Spicer signaled the alignment. As a middle linebacker, Biff ran the defense. The other 10 Bulldogs gathered around him to take instruction. With 4 blubber butts in front of him, Biff could unleash his strength and speed on any Tiger daring to cross the line of scrimmage. Now it was 3rd down and 8 yards to go for Pine River. They're going to run a slant play. Arms up on 2. Chris, don't get fooled by the juke move, okay? Jimmy, keep in front of you. Break. Jimmy and Chris trotted off to the sideline, with Biff remaining right where the huddle had broken. Pine River's offense took time. Most junior high teams didn't pass, but 8 yards was too far to run again. Pine River threw a slant. The receiver juke, Chris bit, and then was shoved aside for an open slant across the middle. Jimmy hit him with a shoulder, spinning both. Jimmy fell down and the receiver turned back for the end zone. Biff punched the ball out from behind, which Chris recovered before being buried in a pile of bodies. Biff looked to the sideline. His father, keenly aware that milking needed to begin in 12 minutes, looked at his watch. His mother stood, stopping her clapping only to point to him. Beside her, Uncle Ewan clapped as enthusiastically as the other fathers who weren't dairy farmers. "What'd I tell you about the slant?" Biff said as Jimmy returned to the sideline following the turnover. Jimmy didn't answer. Most of the 8th graders started on offense, letting Biff catch his breath to look at the scoreboard. Home 36, visitors 6. The Split Rock Bulldogs were crushing the kids from Pine River with 7 minutes left to go in the game. After 3 feeble runs up the middle, the offense punted. Biff slapped his helmet, then took Chris by the face mask for a headbutt. "Keep them in front of you." The junior high football season was already half done, and it worried Biff that what would happen when he could no longer take out his anger on the padded kid across from him. Why did Isaac Larson really die? Thud. What is hidden in that tunnel? Smash. Who is that slick fella in the red Thunderbird? Crunch. What's Uncle Ewan's deal? Punch. What's got Jimmy and Chris so rattled? Shove. Is this mumbo-jumbo about Lake Manitou really haunted real? Late hit. 15-yard personal foul. Damn it. Chapter 31. Those Who Roast. Mizhike Band of Ojibwe Reservation, October 7th, 1961. McGeesy Asabakashi sat alone, weighing how much honesty to give his guests when they arrived. He'd had more people visit him over the past 3 months than he'd had in the past 3 years. On his shelf, he found a book, William Warren's History of the Ojibwe Nation. Inside the green cover, he found Fawn's letter. June 9th, 1912. Dearest McGeesy, protect the children. Now that I've given birth to my firstborn son, I fully understand the terrible choice made by Lily. I hope you understand why I could not stay. One of us is wrong, and nothing I say or do can change her mind. I will prepare for the future. You must be ever vigilant at Lake Manitou. If Lily learns she is wrong, she might make matters worse. In fact, I fear that... McGeesy folded the letter, tucked it back in the book, and set it aside. Fawn was right. and now the children have come to me for advice." While he waited, he processed the burlap sacks full of raw wild rice. 3 big bags gave him enough food for the rest of the year. Superintendent Norval Riel had taken a busload of students up the rice fields around Leech Lake to teach them the skills of harvesting in canoes, and then drying the rice on tarps. Behind him, in the shadow of the porch, all 3 bags waited for preservation. In front of him, McGeesy had the big black kettle that once belonged to his mother Winnie. It sat upon the coals of a wood-fed fire in the middle of his yard. With a yardstick-sized paddle, he stirred the wild rice to ensure it roasted evenly. Over the course of his life, the term used for his people had changed from Chippewa to Ojibwe to Anishinaabe, which Riel preferred. Riel explained the meaning of the word Anishinaabe ranged from beings made from nothing to original man to simply the people. The previous word, Ojibwe, had a more sinister definition, translating commonly to those who roast until it puckers. Riel had taught his students that definition referred to a curing method for new moccasins that required a little heat to treat the leather. Stirring the kettle of roasting wild rice, McGeesy wondered if the word might have referenced the method of preparing the food that grows on water, stated in the 7 Fires prophecy. But after what befell his grandfather and great-grandfather, he knew the horrific practice of roasting referred to captured enemies upon pyres. I wonder if Riel teaches about burning enemies alive. An enemy had returned to Lake Manitou, even if McGeesy had not seen its face. Leonard White Elk had dismissed it, and Wally Crane listened but took little action. Now, like the terrible year of 1898, children had begun to take notice. Using thick mitts, McGeesy lifted the black kettle from the fire and walked it several steps to the chafing pit. He poured the hot rice into the small pit he dug in the front yard, which was lined with smooth wood. A spare chair waited in front of it. A few feet from the chafing pit, the winnowing tray rested upon a 3rd chair, with boxes of empty jars and cans behind it. They are late. McGeesy slipped off his boots and slipped on a pair of hardened old moccasins kept for use once a year. He found his dancing stick beside the chair and had just set 1 foot upon the warm rice when he heard a voice. "Aneen, Uncle McGeesy," Nicky Guerin called. In truth, he was a great-uncle, brother to Nicky's grandmother, Lily. He'd met her on several occasions over the years, but only as a student at Turtle Island Jesuit School. Seeing her made him almost sick to his stomach, for despite her efforts, she looked so much like his sister. A strapping young farmer followed her, a crooked grin on his face. "First, we will work, and then we'll talk." "Of course, Mr. Riel made that perfectly clear," Nicky said as she approached. "Show us what needs to be done." For the better part of the afternoon, the teenagers worked diligently. Gavin McPherson, with 180 pounds of lean muscle, wore the moccasins and crushed the cooked rice under his feet as he attempted the dance used to separate chaff from the kernel. At the next station, Nicole used the tray and the air to separate chaff, which before she packaged up the grain in vessels that would protect it from pests over the course of the year. Together, they finished a sack and a half of harvested rice. Finally, McGeesy pushed aside decades of anguish to say, "Tell me what you've seen." Each of them retrieved an object. In Nicky's fingers, she held the metallic striking plate of a lighter. Gavin, however, ripped McGeesy's heart from his chest when he showed him the leather-bound journal of Jean-Nicolas Guerin. How much different would things have been if he'd lived? Chapter 32, Dracula and the Headless Horseman. Old Copper Road, October 16th, 1961. Jimmy Nielsen knew the moment it happened, even though he didn't learn of the murder until the following day. The overcast, dreary October day seemed to slam the door in the face of summer. Meteorologically, a strong low-pressure system and the upper-level disturbance approached central Minnesota and pulled moist and unstable weather right up to Hiawatha County. The warm, humid air lifted above the cold front and violently returned back down to Lake Manitou shortly before midnight. Just north of Nimrod, a funnel cloud dropped down from the colliding system, ripping through woods for almost a mile. Along the southern shore of Lake Manitou, a bolt of lightning struck the tallest pine on Turtle Island and rattled the windows of his home. When it struck, Jimmy had been dreaming of missed tackles on the football field. The cannon blast of thunder almost flipped him out of his bed, where he quickly took measure of his reality. For a moment, he almost ran to find comfort with his sister Faye, but then remembered she'd left for Mankato State College back in August. Of his three sisters, Faye had been the most maternal. His eldest sister, Rachel, had been gone for 4 years and was now married with an infant. Alexandra, only 5 years older, openly despised him. Jimmy calmed his heart and laid back down, pulling his pillow over his head in case the storm tried to wake him again. Soon, Jimmy found himself back at Haggard Quarry, in the godforsaken tunnel. This time, the chain-link gate was left wide open. At the spot where the seam of quartz ended and the dark, dense granite began, the underbelly of Lake Manitou had been magically cleared away to reveal smooth, polished walls formed without joints. Jimmy's hand touched the smooth surface and followed it several yards until he found an entrance with a vaulted cut. As soon as he stepped in, he knew where he'd seen the room before. From the cobwebs and the waxy candelabras to the great descending stairs and tall pillars supporting the ceiling, the chamber was unmistakable for its most prominent feature, a sarcophagus. The stone tomb belonged to Dracula, and the stake and hammer beside it left Jimmy with no other choice. He had to kill the monster. His fingers tingled as he took hold of the cold iron. Would the monster have slicked Bela Lugosi hair, or would it be furry like the Wolfman? With a shove, Jimmy pushed aside the lid and found Rory Stewart. "Help me," Rory gasped, and from within the burial bed, a pair of arms came up from around the pillow to clasp a white rag over his face. "If you've come to kill me, you've chosen the wrong weapons." The iron in Jimmy's hands melted into useless pools upon the floor. Rory Stewart continued to struggle inside of the coffin as black hands pulled him through the bottom of the coffin, and no sooner did he vanish than a black, inky cloud began to flow out of the space, causing Jimmy to step away. Weird. It didn't look like that in the movie. The villain in the shadows was not Count Dracula either. "Do you think my servants would allow my sleep to be disturbed? Do you think they would serve your will or mine, fool?" The voice came from behind one of the towering pillars that stretched to the ceiling, the very foundations of Lake Manitou. Instead of a Romanian nobleman, a bronzed figure stepped out. Instead of clothes, he wore beaded fabric upon his ankles, knees, loin, neck, and wrists. Without a hair upon his body or face, the hair upon his head was shaved to the scalp, except where it formed 2 horns of hair. The horned serpent? Or just a coincidence? The first horn formed above his forehead, where it was entwined with beads that protruded several inches. Atop his head, A great red braid formed a second horn, lifting from the top of his head more than a foot before cascading down to the middle of his back. "Have you forgotten my name, boy? Isn't it written upon the stars? You should not have come here." Jimmy had heard enough. He'd seen enough. He bolted through the vaulted entrance and back to the tunnel, except now the gate was closed. "Do you think I could be killed? Me? I am the master of death." Turning, Jimmy saw a red horn grab his own neck, and with a violent tug, tore his own head from his shoulders. "I will rise from my own death and smash your prophecy to pieces." Redhorn, with the athletic grace of quarterback Johnny Unitas, took his own head and threw it into Jimmy's chest. The force of it took him through the gate and tin shed and out into the center of the quarry. Back here again? Rising to his feet, Jimmy frantically looked around for Redhorn's severed head, but instead only found pieces of shattered pumpkin and the rubble of tin and lumber. A demonic growl sounded in the darkness. From the shallow end of Haggard Quarry, 6 hunched creatures approached, waddling awkwardly like a pack of hyenas. But when they came into the light, they rose upon their hind legs to reveal arms that stretched from shoulder to their toes. The Takpai. "You should not have come here. We won't let you take him from us." Jimmy ran from the steep end of the quarry, remembering a path that had previously allowed him to escape unseen. The Takpai snapped at his heels as he climbed up a level, forcing them to run around to the shallow end. By the time they cleared the first level, he'd climbed up another level. "Do you think you can run from us? There's nowhere we can't reach you if our master wills it." Jimmy soon reached the surface, but instead of climbing up onto the highway, he found himself standing on a location vaguely familiar: the top of Nicollet Dam. 3 inky Takpai appeared on both sides of the dam, slowly trapping him with malice on their slender faces. "There is only one choice for you." On one side of the dam, Jimmy saw Redhorn's open tomb waiting below. On the other side of the dam, he saw the raging waters of the Blue Knife River and a rope. Jimmy took hold of it, placing his feet against the surface of the dam. With one hand over another, he began his descent. "You can't escape us," the Takpai hissed. Their inky hands touched the rope, but instead of severing it, they commanded it. It coiled itself around Jimmy's neck, strangling him until he felt his feet slipping and his hands losing strength. Why does this dream seem so real? When Jimmy woke, he was out of breath. His fear turned to immediate anger that a dream had rattled him, and he tossed his sheets aside. His alarm clock read 1:02 a.m. Knowing sleep wouldn't come, he rose and walked to his window to see if something more surprising than Redhorn, Dracula, or the Headless Horseman. It was his father. Ed Nielsen sat cross-legged in the middle of the farmyard, with a pole across his lap and a shotgun at his side. His gaze looked out at Lake Manitou. His father had confessed once that he'd never slept a night away from home. During World War II, he had a house full of women to care for, including his wife, widowed mother, widowed grandmother, and 2 daughters. Yet, even in days of peace, he remained a homebody focused on his fields and flocks. What is he hunting? A few moments later, Jimmy slipped his feet into a pair of his father's snow boots and trudged out to the light of the lamppost. "The storm woke the living, too," his father greeted, flicking a stubby cigarette butt into the gravel in front of him, joining a dozen cold butts. The shotgun spoke for itself. Countless times the animals in the barn sent out an alarm whenever badgers, coyotes, wolves, or even a stray black bear prowled too close, and his father jumped into action. The pole sat beside him now like an afterthought. The pole was neither a shovel nor a hoe, both good weapons for smashing varmints. Instead, it was a woven tangle of willow branches with a jagged stone blade tied to its head. A caveman's weapon. A spear. Something prowling, Pa? Ed scoffed. Quite the storm, huh? Jimmy nodded. His father stared off in the distance. Your mother hates storms, but I find them to be wondrous. You can almost feel the magic in the air. Sit. You can help me keep watch. Jimmy obeyed, sitting on his father's left side opposite the shotgun. What are we expecting to see? He never told me specifically. His father slid the willow spear over to Jimmy, letting him inspect it. He made this. I keep it tucked away in the stone foundation of the barn. Just before you came out here, do you know what I was thinking of? Dracula. Jimmy shrugged. I was awake, but it's like my mind shifted into neutral while still going down the road at full speed. I saw my grandfather and my grandson come walking up that hill to offer counsel. I'm not even sure how I knew it was my grandson, but you never met him, did you? Jimmy was still rattled by the thoughts of a son. Grandpa Sig? No, not my father, my grandfather Martin. I never knew my father. You've heard the reason from Grandma Dee, right? She was married a month before Grandpa Sig left to go fight in World War I. By the time I was born, he was dead and buried. My grandfather Martin was the only father I knew. He was the one who made this. He told me I'd need it in battle with monsters. For a few minutes, I thought the time had come. The Manitou? His father chuckled. How do you know about the Manitou? Don't let those good Lutheran women hear you talk about stuff like the Manitou, okay? Wally Crane told us campfire stories. Ah, Wally, of course. He sighed loudly. Grandpa Martin taught me while we worked. I'd be plowing a field, chopping wood, and these instructions would come out, and then were never spoken of again. I remember to this day, though, 1986. Shit, I'll be old by then. Almost 70. And you? You'll be my age. I suppose I need to share, but I need you to keep it secret. It's more than just trying not to sound crazy to your neighbors. You have allies and enemies in this world, and you never know when they wear a false face. So keep your secrets until you know for certain. Jimmy's throat tightened. So does this have something to do with the Manitou? What do you know about being a Nielsen? We're Norwegian. You are French, Swedish, Norwegian, and Faroese. Egyptian? His father laughed. With an F. Martin was born on the Faroe Islands and grew up in Bergen, Norway, where he met your great-grandmother Dolly. Jimmy remembered she had white hair and a flabby chin. In Faroese, the name Nielsen means cloud champion, which I suppose partially explains why I love storms. Before coming to America, we Nielsens were sailors, mastmen. We'd climb up to the top of any ship to hang sails or make repairs, regardless of the weather. Weather doesn't frighten us. We live in the clouds, and lightning is our companion. I've let you grow up like a normal American teenager, but our hands are seafaring hands. Do you see the skill that went into the pole you're holding? Your grandfather wove 100 willow branches together to fashion it. He claimed it was as strong as steel. Why? Why'd he even make it? I don't even know where to begin, his father sighed, but then he pointed west. You know GB Hollow, right? The swamp between our farm and the Bergs. There's a big willow tree that grows there. That's where he harvested the branches for this. I'm not sure if it's just this one tree or all willows, but there's something special about it. There are tools for all sorts of situations. A shotgun is good on an angry badger, and that staff will help with the rest. One day in the future, you'll take my place as a guardian." Suddenly, shadows appeared in front of them, long and black. A light had been turned on in the kitchen, and the dozen bulbs created a strong enough light to flood out the darkness. Jimmy and his father saw their own shadows upon the ground. "One of the gals is awake. We'll talk again. You take the shotgun." "But I have more questions." This is the end of part 7.